on to our presentation for a class through Ball State University in Indiana. It's a behavior change replication project, and what our group wanted to do was to see if we could replicate a study that increased daily step count through behavior contrast. The members of our group are Megan O'Loughlin, Becca Duncan, Ashley Mazza, and Jen Eubanks. The first part of our presentation includes a literature review. For our project, we looked at 5 pieces of literature that all had something that pertained to the project. The first piece of literature was appropriate intervention strategies for weight loss and prevention of weight regain. In this study, we learned that 55% of adults are classified as overweight or obese. Therefore, an energy deficit of 500 to 1,000 calories achieved by increasing energy intake showed significant health benefits. Evidence shows that health benefits can be reached within 150 minutes or 2.5 hours per week of exercise. Increasing that exercise to 200 to 300 minutes or 3.5 to 5 hours per week resulted in long-term maintenance of weight loss. Therefore, we thought it was an important study to look at as we wanted to increase our steps as well. The second literature review was the treatment and prevention of obesity. What is the role of exercise? This study identified obesity also as a significant health problem. And the study looked to see if an increase in expenditure of energy through exercise would help enhance the total weight loss and weight regain. It was an important component of effective interventions. And that's what the researchers wanted to see. They used pedometers as step counters and pedometers are on the rise. They found that 60 to 90 minutes per day of walking or physical exercise was significantly beneficial for weight loss. They found that increasing exercise through intervals was helpful as well. Reinforcement increases the positive outcome, which again was important to our study because that's what we were replicating. We wanted to see if reinforcement would produce a higher rate of steps per day. The third piece of literature that we looked at was increasing physical activity quantitative synthesis. This synthesis looked at 127 studies that were analyzed to see if interventions were effective for increasing exercise. 131 subjects were utilized. They came from all different communities, including work, school, home, and healthcare. Behavior modification was used with mediated delivery. Mediation did make a positive impact on the increase in activity. Groups were combined ages and self-reported being healthy individuals. Physical activity could be increased by intervention was what the results yielded. The other study that we looked at was a preliminary study on the impact of pedometer-based intervention on daily steps. This was an 8-week study with 37 participants. All participants were college employees who volunteered to participate. There was a baseline phase where the participants completed a survey and kept track of the number of steps taken per day. Then there was an intervention where it was a goal set by the participants, self-monitoring, and weekly email reminders. The results yielded an increase in steps from 8,565 to 10,538 steps per day. So there was a strong correlation that the intervention was working. People with the greatest increase were those who averaged less than 6,000 steps per day, or those who were considered obese. And the authors took that into consideration because possibly the more overweight a person was, the less steps they needed to actually show a greater increase. And the types of reinforcement that was found to be effective were self-managed reinforcements with minimal contact and a pedometer-based lifestyle, which again was very similar to the study that we looked at. The last study is maintaining high ambulatory activity levels of sedentary adults with a reinforcement schedule. So basically, this study showed that a lack of physical activity had a higher mortality rate. And physical activity can increase a lifespan by 47%. They wanted to see if reinforcement would increase activity levels. 71 adults used pedometers and were encouraged to walk more than 10,000 steps per day. They were also given daily rewards. The results yielded that monitoring plus a reinforcement schedule showed high results of steps taken when put in place. 24-week follow-up found that there was no difference in the control group or the reward group. Therefore, once reinforcement was stopped, activity returned to the pre-reinforcement state, which then also gives more significance to the fact that the reinforcement was actually responsible for increasing the steps. Those were some of the pieces of literature that we looked at, and now we are going to discuss the methods.
As far as the methods section for our behavior change project, the participants in our project were 5 healthy adult females. They were all Ball State students in the graduate class SPCE 611, which is Advanced Applied Behavior Analysis. All 5 of the participants were healthy adult females from various places across the United States. They were all willing participants in the study and met screening criteria, which included elimination of subjects who were not interested in increasing their exercise levels, had asthma, were pregnant, or were aware of any reasons that they should avoid physical exercise. So all the participants met the criteria. All of the participants were also given a copy of Be Active Your Way, which is a guide from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and basically provides information for individuals aged 18 to 64 on ways that they can increase their exercise and based on their current activity levels. So the participants were each given a copy of this guide, but they were not given any formal training on it. As far as materials, each participant also needed to have either a Fitbit or a phone application to count their daily steps. And they also needed access to a computer and internet in order to log daily steps with the group on a Google document. The behavior was defined as total daily steps taken, and that was what we were going to target in the behavior change project. And daily steps was defined as a person moving their feet at one at a time, either forwards or backwards. And the behavior was going to be recorded by either a Fitbit or a phone device to count steps. The independent variable in this project was defined as a contingency-based prize reinforcement system, where the prizes were given depending on the number of daily steps taken. Treatment fidelity in this project was assessed by having participants collect inter-observer IOA agreement data for 10 minutes daily in 2 days in each of the phases. So they logged how many daily steps they had either on their Fitbit or on their phone device, and then as well as a secondary device to log steps, so either another phone application or a clicker device. For the 10-minute time period where both primary and secondary data was collected, the percent of total count IOA was calculated using the formula which is shown in the box. Smaller count divided by larger count times 100 equaled the total count IOA percentage. The next part of our project is the procedures section.
So for our procedures, we conducted a 1-week baseline, which was 5 days. And like Ashley stated, we had 5 adult females. The applications that we used, 2 participants used the Fitbit, 1 participant used the S Health app, and another participant used the Pacer app. During baseline, no reinforcement was provided. So as far as our interventions, once we had the 5 days of baseline, the initial criterion was set at 10,000 steps per day. We had a 2-week intervention. Each successful criterion increased with 500 steps, and each criterion level had 3 days. The levels increased 2 times, then were reversed to demonstrate for control, back to the 10,000 steps per day, and then the final phase increased to the highest level. Small self-selected reinforcers were used at the end of each successful day, and they were the same type and same quantity daily, which we'll go over some examples that we used later on. And then 1 large reinforcer was used at the end of out of the 12 out of the 14 successful days. That was generally between $20 and $50. And next we'll have the results section.
So we had very successful results. All 4 of the participants in the study were able to increase their daily step count from baseline. Each participant was able to achieve 3 consecutive days of 11,000 steps, which was our highest criterion. And each participant was able to reach their long-term goal at the end of the study, which was a larger reinforcement. Here is a graph with some of our data. As you can see, each subject had an increase in step count. This is the data from each of our criterion. We increased the step criterion by 500 steps in each criterion, except the 4th criterion, where we did a decrease with the changing criterion design to see if it would correspond. And for most of the participants, we did see a corresponding decrease in steps. So more about our results. So our percent increase in step count from the baseline average for each person ranged from 11% to 34%. So we all had relatively significant increase, especially for already having an active and healthy lifestyles and relatively high baselines. So the group gained an average increase in steps by about 21% from the baseline. Pretty successful. So here's a graph showing all of our individual data from each criterion. As you can see, it slopes up. And right here is where we drop to the 10,000 step criterion. And then you can see it shift back up again when we set the criterion for reinforcement at 11,000 steps here. Now we're going to talk about method and results by each participant, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about how our section of the project was different for us for each individual. The first person presenting is Becca.
So for my portion of it, for the daily reinforcement, for steps that were met for that day, I received 1 cup of frozen blueberries, and then at the end of the 12 out of 14 successful days, it was eating out at dinner. And the next slide shows my graph. The baseline is pretty variable, but it does decrease towards the end of the baseline. So for the first phase, when we started at 10,000 steps, each day was pretty close to criterion. But then the second phase for 10,500 steps, my steps were pretty high, so they weren't very close to the criterion. So whether the reinforcement really controlled the steps that day, and the same thing goes for the criterion of 11,000 steps. That phase is a little bit longer because of those steps that are below criterion, so it took a little longer to get to the 3 above criterion. And then for the 10,000 steps, reversing to the initial criterion and then moving back up to the 11,000 steps. So for some of the sections, some of the steps are not necessarily correlated with the criterion line, and there's a couple of confounding variables that could contribute to that. So one could be vacation. So during the 10,500 criterion phase, I was on vacation and went hiking, so that's why that's so high. And then the 11,000 criterion, I was sick. So there's a couple of confounding variables that could be contributing to such a high variability in the data.
This section is talking about my reinforcement. This is Megan. So I had 2 small reinforcers. One is a little stronger than some of the other reinforcement chosen in this study. I had chocolate and wine, so maybe I had a little bit more motivation than everyone else. And I was successful in my 12 of 14 days, so I was able to receive a pedicure, which was very nice and relaxing. Here is my graph. You can see busy with school. I was pretty low in my baselines. I was surprised that I wasn't reaching 10,000 steps yet, but I had a lot of fun seeing how many steps and making sure I got just exactly the right amount. So I could see that data. And so I consistently went up. When we went down to the 10,000, my steps went down even further because I don't know if I really thought of it as an actual criterion where I was earning my reinforcement since we had dropped. Kind of forgot about doing all my steps, but then I increased it again. And I've also found since the study, I've continued to increase my steps and wanting to do 10,000 or more steps each day. So I think it had some long-lasting effects too. Just feeling, feel better when you're getting consistently the same amount of exercise every day. Okay, great. So now we are going to Ashley.
Okay, as far as my reinforcement, my daily reinforcement for meeting the step criterion was either a handful of chocolate-covered pretzels or a glass of wine or beer. And then my reinforcement for successfully meeting criterion in 12 out of 14 days was a new pair of workout pants. So I did meet that. So I was able to get a new pair of workout pants. As far as my graph, my results were pretty variable. In baseline, I was well exceeding the 10,000 step criterion, which I wasn't aware that I was walking that many steps until I started looking at the daily step count. And then, as you can see, it decreased a bit at the 10,000 step criterion. I think being more aware of how many steps I was taking, only needing to take that 10,000 made it go down a bit. And then for the next 3 to 4 criterions, there was some confounding variables. I started training for a marathon in the middle of this. So some days, as you can see, I have very high step count where I had to do long runs. And then others where it's very low. Usually with my schedule, I wasn't able to do a run. So that would just be my daily steps for the day. But overall, I did increase my steps quite a bit. And I found that I use the Fitbit and the step counter a lot more. And actually, I find it interesting to look at my steps every day to see if I've met the 10,000 or how much I've exceeded it by. So next up is Jen.
For my daily reinforcement for reaching my step criterion, I would allow myself to have one Mallomar cookie. And then after 12 out of 14 successful days, I ordered lunch with coworkers who were very supportive of me throughout this process. And if we look at my graph, the baseline was pretty consistent except for the one day where I actually was sick. So I think I barely actually got out of bed that day. But other than that, I tried to stay pretty consistent to baseline. There was a couple of, like at the second 10,000 mark and the 11,000 mark, I dipped below. But again, I use my phone, so I carried it with me wherever I went. And there were times that I forgot to pick it up or that I didn't have it on me. But I found that carrying my phone caused me to want to walk farther. And just looking at how many steps I did, I'm not really sure if the reinforcements were the cause of my steps or if I just wanted to beat the amount of steps I had the day before. So again, with my graph, I tried to stay pretty consistent. I was aware of the steps that I was taking. I'm up and down at my job, but I really made sure that I got the steps in that I needed. And now we're going to move to the discussion piece of our presentation.
So for the discussion, we found some limitations. As Jennifer touched on, we all found that our behavior may not have been controlled completely by the personal reinforcement. Being both the researcher and the participant in the study motivate us more to see positive and increasing data with a criterion. And also, even if we weren't the researchers, seeing your steps increase is reinforcing in itself without any other kind of reinforcement. Another limitation could have been the different accelerometers, which was also discussed. A phone can be held or put in your pocket, but more often than not, you'll put it down, walk somewhere else, and come back to it. Whereas the Fitbit is on a wrist, and so it is more likely to record all of your steps. And we did have different reinforcement prizes for each participant. Some might have been at varying level of reinforcement preference for each individual. And we all had a very active lifestyle. So the changes might have been easier for us to make significant changes in step count. Whereas if we weren't as active before in our baseline, it might have been more difficult to reach the 10,000 and 11,000 step counts. So ideas for future research, thinking maybe an outside source, such as a friend or family member, could be able to deliver the reinforcement. So it's not coming out of our own bank account, and it's not something we're controlling ourselves. We have that outside social reinforcement as well. And there's other ways of doing this. You could use an online goal meeting program such as stick.com. This is a program where you can have a referee or a family member who's checking your data and recording if you were successful or not. It actually involves a response cost where money is coming out of your bank account and being donated to a charity of your choice or a charity that you don't like as much. And so with this study, we found behavior contracting was successful for increasing step count, but it also might be successful to increase other healthy behaviors, such as eating more healthy foods, such as fruits and vegetables, drinking water, doing strengthening activities, or anything of the sort. For another study, we might select a higher reinforcement, which might be able to increase the step count, even when the researcher and participant are not the same. Because if we didn't have that dynamic, we might not have seen the results that we had. Thank you so much for listening to our study. We're excited to share results with you. And that is the end. Thank you very much. Here are references.